boyfriend keeps laughing with my female coworker and teaching her his language. She still thinks she's learning how to flirt. Trish started working at my waitressing job 5 months ago, and from the moment she saw my boyfriend Kaido, she set her eyes on him like he was the last infinity stone. He was half Japanese like me, meaning we related on a deep level, and for some reason Trish hated this the most. The first time she saw us having lunch, she made herself comfortable in my seat next to his when I got up to use the bathroom. She pressed her hips against his and flashed a flirty smile before saying, "Konnichiwa." When he awkwardly said it back, she grabbed a pair of chopsticks and started eating noodles unsuccessfully, complaining about whitewashed girls, appropriating his beautiful culture, very obviously referring to me. When I came back from the bathroom, she told me to grab a chair, telling me I was welcome to join in on their conversation. It definitely struck a nerve, but I was so secure in Kaido and I's relationship I didn't even mind. Until Trish started trying to implode us. She'd corner him when I wasn't looking and tell him innuendo-style phrases in Japanese that she got off Google Translate. Whenever we were talking, she'd always squeeze past us, very slowly, sometimes making sure to rub her behind against Kaido, and other times facing him directly and giving him the F me eyes. The thing that really made me mad was when she asked Kaido to come teach her Japanese at her house after work. I was going to confront her there and then, but we were in the middle of a very busy service, and I told myself I'd do it right after. Big mistake. You see, at some point during service, these important Japanese businessmen came in for food. They were at my section, but Trish practically shoved me aside to serve them. "Please speak Japanese. I understand everything," she told them. They looked pleasantly surprised and started rattling off their order with specific modifications and allergies. Trish just kept saying, hi, while scribbling nonsense. 45 minutes later, it was chaos. One guy got served the wrong starter. Another received 2 sushi orders instead of his chicken chow mein. And the third guy actually started having an allergic reaction to shellfish, which he asked to exclude. That's when Trish did it. While Kaido ran to get the EpiPen, she pointed at me and told her cousin, who was the manager, that I changed the order to sabotage her. And without verifying anything, her cousin wrote me up on the spot in front of everyone. "One more incident and you're terminated." I went home crushed and just cried to Kaido. I was wondering if just quitting was my best option, until Kaido suggested something. If she wants me to teach her Japanese, let's do exactly that. Over the next few weeks, we set our plan into place. At the restaurant, Kaido and I feigned relationship problems, and of course, Trish jumped at the opportunity to comfort him. She started sitting next to him again, placing his hand on her shoulder, getting dangerously close. And then Kaido went for it. He offered to teach her Japanese. Not at her house, just here in the restaurant. But she jumped at it like SpongeBob hearing the Goofy Goober song. Before I knew it, they were in the back together, laughing at each other and grinning ear to ear. Kaido was teaching her phrases, and she was listening to him with puppy eyes and repeating everything in the most seductive anime e-girl voice she could put on. Me and Kaido would exchange quick glances trying not to laugh because these phrases were just ridiculous. Very soon, he convinced her to start saying these phrases to customers. I would waitress next to her and hear her say "kusobaba," meaning crappy old hag, to an elderly Japanese lady. I would have to clench my jaw tight so I wouldn't laugh. Another absolute gem I heard from here in one day alone were "busu shine," meaning ugly betch, go die, to a little 7-year-old girl with autism. What made the whole situation so much better was how every time after insulting a customer, she'd run to Kaido to tell him she did it like she was a 4-year-old old kid, showing you how quickly she could eat her crayon. All while Kaido would just smile at her and tell her she was doing great. For weeks, Trish insulted customers in Japanese, telling them "kusokuta shine," eat shit and die, "omae no senzo wo fakushiro," F your ancestors, or my personal favorite, "ore baka da kedo wakateru tsumori," I'm stupid and think I know what I'm saying. But then the owner's mother's 85th birthday party happened. She was fully Japanese and seeing her son for the first time in 3 years. The owner was there, and they reserved an entire section to themselves. It was set to be an amazing night. Trish was waitressing, and that's when Kaido did it. He convinced her to go take the woman's order and told Trish to take it in Japanese, which she did. She went up to the owner's mother and with the confidence of a Bradley Martin in a street fight with an MMA fighter said, "Konnichiwa, kusobaba tsukainai, ketsu ni kisushiro," meaning, "Hello, you dumb old good-for-nothing beach, kiss my behind." The restaurant went silent. The owner's face drained of all color like someone had pulled a plug and let everything good flow out. His hands started shaking so bad the napkin in his lap fell to the floor. He pushed his chair back real slow and stood up, the metal legs scraping against the floor making this awful sound that made everyone flinch. Every single person at that birthday table just froze like they were playing freeze tag. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The owner's eyes stayed locked on Trish's face, and I swear the temperature in the whole restaurant dropped 10 degrees. Kaido practically jumped over 2 tables trying to get to the owner, his mouth going a mile a minute in Japanese, his hands moving around trying to explain something. The owner raised one hand sharp and quick, cutting Kaido off mid-sentence without even looking at him. His eyes never left Trish. That's when Trish's cousin shot up from wherever she'd been hiding and started pointing at me, her voice getting louder with each word. She kept saying I must have done something to mess with Trish again, that I was jealous and trying to ruin everything. The owner's mother sat there with her hands folded in her lap, this look on her face like someone had just slapped her, but she was too polite to say anything. The owner reached down real gentle and took his mother's arm, helping her stand up from her chair. He spoke to her in this soft Japanese that sounded nothing like how angry his face looked. Then he turned to everyone at the reserved section and told them service would be paused while he handled this situation. His voice was so calm it was scary, like when your dad gets quiet instead of yelling and you know you're really in trouble. Trish must have thought she could fix this because she started talking again, more of those Japanese phrases tumbling out of her mouth. Each word made things worse. The birthday guests started pulling out their phones and I could see them typing stuff into translation apps. One lady's eyes went huge and she covered her mouth with her hand. Another guy actually laughed, but not in a funny way, more like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Trish kept going, probably calling them all kinds of horrible things while thinking she was apologizing. Kaido grabbed Trish's arm and told her to stop talking right now, that she was making everything worse. She looked at him all confused, her face scrunched up like a little kid who doesn't understand why they're in trouble. She tried to pull her arm away and kept trying to talk, probably thinking if she just said more Japanese words it would somehow fix everything. The owner's voice cut through the room when he told Trish to leave the floor immediately and not come back until he called for her. Then he looked right at me and asked me to help the other servers calm the guests and continue service. The way he said it made it super clear this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I walked over to the owner's mother and bowed the way my grandmother taught me when I was little. I said I was sorry in Japanese for the disruption to her celebration, using the formal words I'd learned growing up. She looked at me with this disappointment that hit me right in the gut. My stomach felt like it dropped through the floor because I knew I was partly responsible for ruining this sweet old lady's special day. The kitchen was chaos when I went back there to grab some water pitchers. Trish's cousin cornered me between the prep station and the dishwasher, her face all red and angry. She started yelling that this was all my fault, that I'd been jealous of Trish since day one. The kitchen staff kept their heads down, chopping vegetables and stirring pots, but I could feel everyone listening. She got right in my face and said if I didn't fix this somehow, she'd fire me on the spot. Her spit actually hit my cheek when she was yelling. The rest of the shift was the longest 3 hours of my life. Every time I walked past the owner's table, I felt sick. The birthday cake sat there untouched. The candles never even lit. The owner had moved his mother to a quieter corner table, and they sat there talking quietly, while the party guests slowly trickled out, some of them shaking their heads and muttering to each other. When the shift finally ended, I practically ran to the parking lot. Kaido was already there, leaning against his car with his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard my footsteps and immediately started saying the plan went way too far. We sat in his car with the engine off, going back and forth about whose idea it was in the first place. He kept saying we should have known it would go bad when she started insulting regular customers. I kept saying he was the one who pushed her to do it at the birthday party. We were both defensive and guilty at the same time, our voices getting louder, then quieter, then louder again. Neither of us wanted to admit we'd let our stupid revenge plan hurt an innocent old lady on her birthday. The parking lot was almost empty by the time we stopped arguing, both of us just sitting there feeling awful about everything. My phone started buzzing in my pocket while we sat there. I pulled it out and saw a group text from the owner to all staff about a mandatory meeting tomorrow morning before opening. The message was only 2 lines long, but formal in a way that made my stomach drop. Kaido's phone went off at the same time and we both just stared at our screens. Other staff started replying with question marks and worried emojis, but the owner never responded. I drove home alone after dropping Kaido at his place and couldn't eat dinner. My roommate asked what was wrong, but I just went straight to my room. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling for hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the owner's mother's face when Trish said those awful things to her. The hurt in her eyes kept replaying in my head. I thought about the businessman who got sick because of Trish's lies about understanding Japanese. I thought about how I let this whole revenge thing go way too far just because I was mad about getting written up unfairly. Around 3 in the morning, I finally dozed off but kept waking up every hour checking my phone to see if the meeting was canceled. It wasn't. I got to the restaurant 45 minutes early the next morning, but half the staff was already there looking nervous. The owner wasn't there yet, but this older guy in a suit was setting up papers at the big table we use for parties. Trish walked in with her cousin, and they both looked confident like nothing was wrong. When everyone arrived, the guy in the suit introduced himself as Pascal Levy, a senior manager from the owner's other restaurant downtown. He said he was here to conduct a formal investigation into last night's incident, and everyone needed to give their account of what happened. His voice was calm, but serious in a way that made it clear this wasn't just some regular staff meeting where we talk about new menu items. He had a yellow legal pad and started calling people up one by one to tell their version of events. Trish went first and immediately started crying. She said she had no idea what those phrases meant, and that I must have set her up because I was jealous of her relationship with Kaido. She kept wiping her eyes with tissues and saying she was just trying to be respectful to the owner's mother by speaking her language. Her cousin nodded along and added that I'd been causing problems since Trish started working here. Pascal wrote everything down without any expression on his face. When he called Kaido up next, I could see my boyfriend's hands shaking. Kaido sat down and looked at the table while he talked. He admitted he taught Trish the phrases but said he never told her what they really meant. He kept his eyes down, and I could tell he was struggling between protecting me and telling the whole truth about our plan. Pascal asked him why he would teach her wrong phrases, and Kaido just said it was a joke that went too far. Then Rick Walton raised his hand and asked if he could speak. Rick was this waiter who'd been there for 3 years and usually kept to himself. He stood up and told Pascal he'd been watching Trish use those same phrases on Japanese customers for weeks. He said he heard her call an old lady terrible things and insult a little girl with special needs. He also brought up how I got written up after the businessman incident when Trish was the one who messed up their order and caused the allergic reaction. Pascal's eyebrows went up and he started writing faster. He asked Rick if he had any proof, and Rick said he'd taken some videos on his phone of Trish saying the phrases to customers. The room got really quiet. Pascal stood up and told everyone to submit written statements about the incident by 5 o'clock today. He said we needed to include any evidence like texts, photos, or videos related to what happened. Then he looked right at all of us and said lying or holding back information would result in immediate termination. The way he said it made it clear he wasn't messing around. After the meeting ended, I went to check next week's schedule posted in the break room. My name was barely on there. I went from 35 hours to just 12. Trish's cousin was standing by the schedule with this smirk on her face that made it obvious she did this to punish me while she still had the power to make schedules. I didn't say anything and just took a picture of the schedule with my phone. I went home and opened my laptop to start working on my statement. I made a detailed timeline starting from when Trish first started hitting on Kaido 5 months ago. I included dates and times for every incident I could remember. I found old text messages where I told friends about Trish rubbing against Kaido in the hallway. I had photos of schedule changes from the past few months showing how the cousin always gave Trish the best shifts. My hands were shaking as I typed everything up because I knew this document might be the only thing that saves my job. I organized everything into folders on my computer with labels for each type of evidence. Around 7 that night, my phone buzzed with a notification from social media. Trish had sent me a direct message saying she owned the floor now and I was finished. She said her cousin would make sure I never got decent hours again and that Kaido would be hers soon. She ended it with 3 laughing emojis. I immediately took a screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. Then I blocked her on everything. 2 days later, Pascal called me while I was getting ready for my shift and asked if I could come in early to discuss the complaints he'd received. The owner had gotten 6 separate emails from birthday party guests with exact translations of what Trish said, plus formal complaints about the whole mess. Pascal's voice sounded worried as he read me parts of the emails and asked me to confirm if this matched what I'd been reporting about Trish's behavior over the past weeks. I told him yes, and that there were probably more incidents nobody had reported yet. When I got to work that afternoon, Trish's cousin was waiting for me in the back hallway near the lockers. She grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks and pushed me against the wall, telling me I better drop this whole thing right now or she'd make sure I never worked in another restaurant in this city. My phone was already recording in my pocket because I'd started doing that whenever I came to work after getting Trish's message. The cousin kept going, saying she knew people at every restaurant within 20 miles, and one phone call from her would end my career. She said her family had connections I couldn't even imagine, and that I was just some nobody who didn't matter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she might hear it, but I kept the phone recording as she made threat after threat about what would happen if I didn't tell Pascal I was lying about everything. After she finally let go and stormed off, I checked my phone to make sure it caught everything, and it did. All 8 minutes of her threatening me. Rick found me in the break room later looking pretty shaken up and asked if I was okay. When I told him about the cousin's threats, he pulled out his phone and showed me something that made my stomach drop. It was a photo from 2 weeks ago during a shift when I'd been off sick, and there was Trish pressed up against Kaido by the walk-in cooler with her hands on his chest and her face inches from his. The timestamp showed 9:47 p.m., which would have been right before closing when barely anyone was around. Rick said he took it because he thought I should know what was happening when I wasn't there, and now he realized Trish had been way more aggressive than anyone knew. I stared at that photo feeling sick because even though I trusted Kaido, seeing her all over him like that when I wasn't around made me realize how hard she'd been pushing to break us up. That night after work, Kaido came over and I showed him the photo without saying anything at first. He immediately started explaining that Trish had cornered him that night, and he'd been trying to get away from her when Rick took the picture. I told him I wasn't mad about the photo, but I was mad that he never told me how bad it was getting when I wasn't there. We ended up having our first real fight in 2 years of dating, with me angry that he'd let things get so far without setting harder boundaries and him frustrated that I was blaming him for Trish's behavior when he'd been trying to handle it without making drama. We went back and forth for an hour, both exhausted from all this drama at work, until we finally agreed to stop all the schemes and just let Pascal's investigation play out without any more games. The next morning I called Conrad Whitaker, an employment lawyer my friend from college had recommended when I told her what was happening. Conrad listened to my whole story from the beginning, taking notes and asking questions about dates and witnesses. When I finished, he explained that while I had some protection against retaliation under employment law, my participation in the revenge plan made things complicated. He said teaching someone wrong phrases on purpose could be seen as creating a hostile work environment, even if Trish had harassed me first. Conrad told me to stick to just facts in any statements, avoid getting into online arguments about it, provide all evidence Pascal requested, and prepare myself for mixed outcomes. He warned that even if Trish faced consequences for harassment, I might face some too for the revenge plan, which wasn't what I wanted to hear but sounded realistic given everything that happened. He said the recording of the cousin threatening me was good evidence of retaliation though, and I should definitely submit that to Pascal. 2 days later, Pascal called Kaido in for a private interview about his role in teaching Trish the phrases. Kaido texted me right after saying he'd tried to minimize my involvement, but had to admit we were dating since Pascal already knew anyway from other staff. He said Pascal asked really specific questions about who came up with the plan and whether management knew what was happening. That same afternoon, the owner sent out a group email requesting any messages between staff members about the birthday incident be submitted for review. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour going back and forth about whether to submit Trish's bragging message where she said she owned the floor and I was finished. Part of me worried it would make me look petty, or like I was trying too hard to get her in trouble, but Conrad had said to provide everything requested. I finally decided to include it along with context about her pursuing Kaido for months and the cousin's threats, knowing it might make me look bad but wanting everything on record. Late that night, I put together my email to Pascal with everything attached, including the direct messages from Trish, photos of all the schedule changes over the past months showing how the cousin always gave Trish better shifts, my detailed timeline of events, and a formal request to remove the write-up from the businessmen incident from my file. My finger hovered over the send button for 5 minutes before I finally clicked it, then immediately felt sick wondering what would happen when Pascal saw everything. Meanwhile, Pascal had been doing his own digging into the restaurant's systems and discovered something huge when he reviewed the point-of-sale records. The cousin had been going in and reassigning sections in the computer to move Trish's mistakes to other servers' records, including mine. The technical evidence showed a clear pattern going back 3 months of the cousin covering up Trish's errors by making them look like other people's mistakes, which explained why my sales numbers looked worse than they should have, and why I'd gotten blamed for orders I never took. The next morning, Pascal called me into his office where a middle-aged Japanese woman was already sitting with her teenage daughter. She explained how 3 weeks ago Trish had served them and called her mother Kusobaba, while smiling sweetly. Her daughter had studied Japanese in college and immediately knew what it meant, but her mom thought maybe she misheard. Now after hearing about the birthday incident, they realized Trish had been doing this on purpose the whole time. Pascal took notes while the woman showed him photos from that day where Trish was clearly visible serving their table. I sat there feeling my stomach twist because this was proof Trish had been insulting customers for weeks and we let it happen. Pascal thanked them for coming forward and asked if they'd be willing to provide a written statement, which they agreed to immediately. After they left, my phone buzzed with a group text from the cousin that made my blood run cold. She wrote that anyone cooperating with the investigation would find their hours cut to nothing and should remember who controlled the schedule around here. Rick forwarded it to me within seconds, asking if I'd gotten the same threat. I immediately screenshotted everything and sent it to Pascal's email with the subject line, "Evidence of intimidation," before the cousin could delete the message. Pascal read it right there in front of me and his jaw tightened as he picked up his phone to call the owner. That night, Kaido came over and we sat at my kitchen table staring at a blank document on his laptop. We both knew we had to come clean about teaching Trish those phrases on purpose, or the truth would come out anyway, and make everything worse. My hands shook as I typed out how the harassment started, the false accusation about the businessmen, and how we planned the whole revenge scheme. Kaido added his parts about deliberately teaching her insults while pretending they were polite phrases. We printed 2 copies and signed them both, knowing this confession might cost us our jobs, but lying would be even worse. 3 days later, Pascal scheduled another all-staff meeting in the main dining room before opening. Kaido and I sat together holding our statements while Trish glared at us from across the room, and the cousin stood near the door with her arms crossed. Pascal asked us to read our statements first, and my voice cracked as I admitted everything we'd done. I explained the months of harassment, the way Trish touched Kaido constantly, how the cousin always took her side, and yes, how we taught her those terrible phrases as revenge. Kaido read his part next, taking full responsibility for coming up with the specific insults and convincing Trish to use them on customers. The room was dead silent except for the sound of Pascal's pen scratching notes, while the owner sat in the corner with his face completely unreadable. When we finished, Pascal stood up and announced his decisions without any emotion in his voice. Trish was suspended immediately pending final review of all the evidence, including multiple customer complaints that had come forward. Kaido was also suspended for 2 weeks without pay for deliberately sabotaging service and endangering customer relations. The cousin was removed from all scheduling duties effective immediately, and would no longer have any management responsibilities. The room erupted in whispers and shocked gasps, but Pascal raised his hand for silence. He turned to me and said I would receive a formal warning for unprofessional conduct that would go in my permanent file. I wasn't suspended because the evidence clearly showed I was responding to documented harassment and false accusations, but my actions were still unacceptable. The warning letter spelled out that any similar incident would result in immediate termination. Part of me felt relief that I still had a job, but mostly I just felt hollow knowing I'd have this mark on my record forever. That night, my phone blew up with notifications as Trish posted on every social media platform, claiming she was a victim of discrimination and workplace bullying. She tagged the restaurant and called for boycotts, saying she'd been set up by jealous coworkers who couldn't stand seeing her succeed. Half the staff commented supporting her and calling the investigation unfair, while others started posting screenshots of her old posts where she bragged about getting me written up. Someone even found her messages about making Kaido hers and posted those too. The comments section turned into a complete war zone, with people taking sides and sharing more and more evidence. My fingers itched to respond and defend myself, but I remembered Conrad's advice about staying quiet and letting facts speak for themselves. Instead, I spent hours organizing every piece of evidence into labeled folders on my computer just in case this turned into a legal issue. I had the screenshots of threats, documentation of schedule changes, witness statements Rick had shared with me, and even security footage timestamps Pascal had mentioned. 2 days later, Pascal called me saying the owner's mother wanted to speak with me privately. My heart pounded as I drove to the restaurant knowing I had to face the woman whose birthday I'd helped ruin. She was sitting in a quiet corner booth when I arrived and gestured for me to sit across from her. I bowed my head and apologized in Japanese, telling her how deeply sorry I was for my part in ruining her celebration. I explained there was no excuse for what we did, and that I took full responsibility for letting revenge cloud my judgment. She listened without interrupting, her weathered hands folded on the table between us. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment before speaking in accented but clear English. She said she was disappointed in everyone involved, but understood that the situation had been building for months with nobody in management paying attention. She wanted the restaurant to be better, to treat all workers fairly regardless of who they knew, and to respect customers of every background. Her son had already promised to bring in outside oversight to fix the toxic culture that had developed. She told me that while my actions were wrong, she could see I was genuinely sorry, and hoped I would learn from this experience. 3 days later, Pascal called everyone into the main dining room before opening, and stood at the front with the owner beside him. The owner's face looked tired but determined as he cleared his throat and started reading from a paper in his hands. He announced that after reviewing all the evidence and witness statements, Trish was terminated immediately for harassment and creating a hostile work environment. The room stayed completely silent as he continued, explaining that all staff would now be required to attend mandatory cultural sensitivity training starting next week. Several servers shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others nodded in agreement with the decision. The owner then turned to look directly at Trish's cousin, who was standing near the back trying to look invisible. He stated that she was demoted from manager to server effective immediately due to her failure to maintain professional standards and favoritism. The restaurant would have external HR oversight for the next 90 days to ensure proper management practices were followed. I watched as relief washed over the faces of servers who had dealt with her unfair treatment for months, but never spoke up about it. The cousin's face turned bright red and she started to protest, but Pascal cut her off with a raised hand. Next, the owner addressed Kaido, explaining he would receive a 2-week unpaid suspension and return on probation with a strict conduct plan. Kaido nodded and accepted it without any argument, keeping his eyes down the entire time. After the meeting, he told me he was grateful it wasn't worse, and that he'd learned a valuable lesson about taking things too far. Pascal pulled me aside afterward and informed me that my previous write-up about the businessman incident was removed from my file. The warning for the revenge plan would remain on record, but the owner respected that I owned my mistakes. That's why I was getting a second chance instead of being fired along with Trish. The following week, we all filed into the break room for our first cultural sensitivity training session. Some staff members rolled their eyes and checked their phones while others actually paid attention to what the trainer was saying. The trainer turned out to be really good, using real examples from our industry without being preachy or boring. Even the skeptics started participating when she made it interactive and relevant to our daily work. She had us role-play different scenarios and discuss how to handle cultural differences respectfully in service situations. By the end of the 2-hour session, most people seemed genuinely engaged and learned something useful. 2 weeks passed with everyone walking on eggshells around each other during shifts. The atmosphere was better without Trish and her cousin's favoritism, but the tension from everything that happened still hung in the air. I found myself dreading coming to work even though the actual harassment had stopped. Every time I walked past the section where the birthday party happened, my stomach would twist with guilt. That's when I realized I needed a fresh start somewhere without all this history and drama. I started browsing job listings online during my breaks and updating my resume for the first time in years. Rick noticed me looking at job postings one day and sat down next to me during our break. He offered to be my reference and pulled out his phone to show me a contact at a smaller family-run cafe downtown. He explained they valued their employees and didn't tolerate any workplace drama, which sounded perfect after everything I'd been through. The owner there was his friend from culinary school who ran a tight but fair operation. I called the number that afternoon and scheduled an interview for the following week. The cafe was cozy and warm, nothing like the formal atmosphere of our restaurant. During the interview, I was honest about the conflict without going into unnecessary detail about the revenge plan. I focused on what I learned about handling workplace harassment properly and the importance of going through proper channels. The owner seemed impressed by my honesty and asked thoughtful questions about my experience and what I was looking for. She offered me a position starting next month with slightly lower pay, but better hours and a healthier work environment. Meanwhile, Kaido enrolled in a conflict resolution class as part of his probation requirements at the restaurant. He came home after each session excited about what he was learning and started applying those skills to our relationship. We set clearer boundaries about keeping work and personal life separate, something we should have done from the beginning. We also established better communication patterns instead of jumping straight to schemes when problems arose. Things between us actually improved now that we weren't plotting together or dealing with constant workplace drama. He showed me the workbook from his class and we practiced some of the exercises together at home. It felt strange but good to be working on healthy conflict resolution after everything we'd been through. A week before my last day, Pascal sent me an email with a neutral reference letter attached. His message thanked me for taking responsibility for my actions during the investigation and not trying to deflect blame. He added that the owner specifically wanted me to know he respected how I handled myself during the investigation process. The reference letter was professional and fair, mentioning my strong work ethic and customer service skills without going into the incident. It also noted that I had learned from my mistakes and shown growth, which was more than I expected given everything that happened. My last shift came 3 days later, and walking through those doors felt different knowing it was the final time. The morning prep went smoothly with everyone focused on their stations, nobody mentioning what happened or making eye contact for too long. Rick helped me set up my section without saying much, just moving chairs and wiping tables while I filled salt shakers and arranged napkins. During the lunch rush, I served tables like normal, taking orders and bringing food while other servers worked around me without the usual jokes or complaints about difficult customers. Madeline passed me in the kitchen twice, and both times she looked straight ahead, carrying plates without acknowledging I was there. When my shift ended at 4, I cleaned my section thoroughly, making sure every table was spotless and all the condiments were full. Rick came over and pulled me into a quick hug, patting my back before heading to his next table. 2 other servers waved from across the dining room, but most people kept working like it was any other day. I grabbed my tips from the register, counting out $63, which was decent for a lunch shift. Walking to the back door, I passed the office where Pascal was doing paperwork, and he gave me a small nod through the window. The door closed behind me with its familiar squeak, and I stood in the parking lot for a minute, looking at the building where I'd worked for 3 years. A week passed before Kaido suggested we go eat there, saying he wanted their pasta special one more time. We got seated in what used to be my section, now covered by a new server I didn't recognize. The owner walked by our table carrying menus to another group and paused for just a second, giving us a brief nod before continuing to the back. The whole place felt different. Servers moving efficiently without the usual chatter, managers actually managing instead of gossiping in corners. Our food came out perfectly timed and properly prepared, something that rarely happened when drama ruled the kitchen. Kaido paid and left a good tip while I looked around one last time at the familiar burgundy walls and hanging lights. My first day at the downtown cafe started the next Monday morning at 7. The owner showed me around the smaller space, only 12 tables compared to the 30 at my old job. She explained their simple system for rotating sections and how tips got pooled and split evenly among the morning crew. The coffee machine was older but worked fine, making the same hissing sounds as I learned to pull shots and steam milk. By noon, I'd served 20 tables and made $35 in tips. Less than before, but without anyone cornering me in the walk-in or spreading rumors about my personal life. 6 weeks settled into a routine of morning shifts, simple orders and going home without stress headaches. The money was tighter, but Kaido and I stopped fighting about work drama because there wasn't any to fight about. I slept through the night without replaying conversations or planning comebacks, just setting my alarm and showing up ready to pour coffee and serve eggs. Thanks for hanging out and exploring all those questions with me today. I really loved just wondering about things together. Can't wait to share more curiosity with you soon. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.